Hey, welcome back. Uh, so this channel started with my very first video, The Destruction of Black Doctors. And in this video, I sort of explored this pattern of being mistreated in the workplace, which is actually common across all professions. And a comment that would appear again and again is, we must build our own. And that's the idea that if we built our own institutions, hospitals, businesses, that this tendency to be mistreated in this way racially, to be on the losing end of these sort of subjective encounters, we would experience that less. And you know, there's a lot of difficulties associated with building our own. But as I explore this idea, which by the way I do 100% agree that we should build black businesses, but when it gets into larger institutions, like, for instance, black pilots are mistreated generally in the aviation industry. Black people have a harder time in the military, and it's not like these organizations are more racist than anything else. It's just in a society like ours where we are easily identified as other, the other who is less powerful will always be mistreated. So, airline pilots in the military, and we can't build our own military. We can't build our own airlines, not like big, giant airlines which rely on revolving debt, investors, and just giant global organizations. We just can't do that. Not as a historically disadvantaged minority in North America. That's just not going to happen. We're going to have to work and exist in these organizations with these unfavorable dynamics, until the end of humanity, probably. But regardless, I wanted to explore, what does it really mean to build our own? What would that take? And as I explored that idea, I ended up looking into a lot of economics, because after all, economics is the study of the distribution of resources. Very boring topic to me early in my life. Now I'm almost fascinated by it. I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be in the military, and economics seemed like some kind of egghead thing over there. But now, as I build my own businesses and I sort of want to know how and why things work the way they do, I am very, very interested in economics. And as I kind of studied it informally, I developed this, you could say, story allegory to explain to my children and explain to others, what it is we're in. You could say that for the majority of time that humans have lived on this planet, most people, most humans, for most of time, did not know that they were sitting on top of a spherical rock spinning through nothingness with a giant fireball millions of miles away. They just didn't know that. Most people. It wasn't until somebody was able to go out, kind of take a picture, or others in the ancient world theorized based on their study of the heavenly bodies, that people were able to figure that out. And so my point being, it's kind of hard to know what you're in when you're that close. It's kind of hard to know what you're on or what you live in. And so I sort of developed this allegory to explain what capitalism really is. In the 80s and 90s where I grew up, questioning capitalism was like something you didn't do unless you were a filthy communist. Like, it was accepted that capitalism was the best humanity could do and was an absolute must to optimize human performance and productivity. And it was just pretty much not questioned. And so I sort of developed this story allegory, if you will, to kind of question some of it and really explore what it really is. And so it goes a little something like this. 10 people magically teleport onto an island with $25 in their pocket. No explanation. They just teleported, they got $25. This island is cut off from the rest of the world, and they immediately know there is probably zero chance they're going to be rescued. So all of the men on this island, for the purposes of this, yes, they're all men, because I don't want any hanky-panky going on my island, they get down to the business of figuring out how they're going to manage long-term survival. All right, so immediately one guy chimes in, where I came from, I was on the seas all the time. I could build a boat, and I could, take us around the island to get the fish, because there were no fish close to the island. They knew they had to go kind of a little ways out. Even if they couldn't escape, they knew they had to get away from the island to get the fish. So he says he'll build and maintain the boat that they need to fish. Two other guys chime in and say, well, we can build fishing nets and lines and we can do the fishing. We will grab the fish that everyone eats and bring it back. And two other guys say, that's cool. We will cook all the fish and prepare whatever food we can find on the island. And another two people say, cool. We'll build the shelters and maintain the shelters that everybody will live in on the island. And another two guys say, you know what? We will be the fire tenders. We will make a fire and maintain that fire that will burn for all the time we're here. It'll keep us warm if it gets cold. It'll dry our clothes if we need it to. It'll cook the food. And maybe it'll signal for a rescue if that's possible. And finally, there's one last guy left, if you're keeping count. One last guy. He says, I'll be the scavenger. I'll gather wood that people need. I'll grab whatever raw materials people need to do whatever they need to do. You tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Okay, so that's 10 roles. One boat maker, one scavenger, and then two of each of those other roles. So everybody decides that since they have $25 in their pocket, each person will pay the other person, the other 9 people, $1 a day for doing those tasks which keep everyone else alive. So each person receives $9 a day, and each person pays out $9 a day. Now this is essentially communism. Yeah, that big cuss word, that C word, that's communism right there, essentially. Now, it's not scaled up to millions, but you can see there's no murder involved, right? Everything is pretty fair. Everybody does their piece, everybody gets paid, yada, 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 right? Okay, so that's what communism would look like in a closed system, small population, where every person knows every other participant, and there's social pressure to actually do your job. Now I introduce a couple changes. A few days in, the boat maker says, you know what? Nobody eats without me. So I think I deserve more than everybody else. So he says, you guys are going to pay me $2 a day for the use of my boat. Now, in a real world situation, there would either be some violence or there would be excessive pressure for him not to do that. But let's say neither of those happened and everyone just capitulated and said, yeah, you're right, you deserve $2 and we all still deserve $1. Something very, very interesting happens. Well, he actually makes $9 a day while each individual on the island loses $1 a day. All right, and since everyone started with $25, this system essentially breaks down at day 25 when everyone goes to zero except for him. At day 25, he now has all the money that landed on the island, $250, and everyone else has $0. They've all lost their money. So on day 26, nobody goes to work while he has all the money. So he sits on a pile of money and nobody else goes to work because they can't really be paid for their work by the other people. Oh, what's that? Oh, we said debt. Yes, of course. That's right. Somebody would create a debt system at this point, and they would loan money out to each one of those people. And that debt, after 60 days, 30 days, would simply serve to make the boat maker even richer than he already was, while everyone else slowly slips into deeper debt. I mean, you could see that with this simple demonstration. So at this point, inequality has essentially created the need for debt, and that debt has served to make the boat maker very, very rich. Crazy, right? There's a little bit of oversimplification in there, but that's kind of what's going on. Now, of course, I'm going to get more detailed with it. It would never just stop with the boat maker. Let's assume that everyone doesn't put excessive pressure on the boat maker to not do what he's doing. And let's say that everyone doesn't kill the boat maker for trying to do it. The next most likely event is that the other people would slowly believe that they also deserve more money. And so in my scenario, what happens is the fishermen say, well, if he deserves $2, I deserve $1.80. And then The food preparers say, well, we deserve $1.60. And then the shelter builders say, well, we deserve $1.40. And then the fire tenders say, well, we deserve $1.20. And just because everyone else got a raise, the scavenger says, well, I want $1.10. How about that? And so now you have yourself a full-blown economy. And something very interesting happens here. I started to chart it at this point. I had AI kind of run through the numbers for me because I'm not doing that much math. And some very interesting dynamics show up. At day 30, the boat maker has $172. And the cook also, both cooks have $52, and the fishermen both have $112. And the first person to go negative is now the shelter builders. They have negative $8, while the fire makers have negative $68, and the scavenger has negative $98. And now I also put it in a diagram down here. Okay, so you can see day 1 is in blue, everybody's equal. Day 10, you can see the inequality starting. And then at day 200, that's the red bars. You can see that the inequality is significant. And it starts between cook 2 and builder 1. And remember, that's just the difference between a person who makes $140 a day and $1.20 a day. But just the way the math works out, with all the ways that people are paid and all the expenses, that's the difference between a person who can accumulate and a person who cannot. When you look up at the boat maker at the top, he's accumulated quite a bit. And then you look at the scavenger and he has negative 900, and that's only after 200 days. Now, in my example, there's no sexual reproduction on the island. You simply divide like cells, like mitosis. You just split in two and you have about, a couple of months with your replacement, and then you die. And so that's how this island represents America, generation after generation, inequality being transmitted. All right, so you can imagine as this goes on for years and years and years, the descendant of this boat maker would have infinite money, while the scavenger's descendants would have infinite debt. All right. I thought to myself, well, maybe these differences are too small, or maybe these differences are too big to really symbolize what's going on in America. But I looked at the standard deviation. If you understand the standard deviation, it measures differences between numbers in a population. All right, so I wanted to know, well, maybe the differences between these incomes aren't realistic enough, or they're not reasonable enough to symbolize what happens in America. But it turns out the standard deviation for my particular island is $2.85. All right. Now, the median income is negative 10 cents. So that means, like, if you were to rank all of the people's incomes per day and then take the very middle, it's negative 10 cents. All right, now, here's the crazy part. The difference between the lowest income and the highest income is 3 standard deviations. Now, I had to ask the AI this particular question. If you look at America, they can't estimate the lowest income and the highest, but they can look at the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile. And if you look at the difference between the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile in America, it's about 2.56 standard deviations. So America actually does represent this particular scenario pretty well with regards to the difference between the lowest people's income and the highest people's income. So essentially, in America, we are experiencing some version of this. In America, this capitalistic advanced society, it needs 2 things to function: poverty and debt. Without poverty and without debt, America doesn't work. So this idea that anyone's going to get rid of debt is crazy. It's not going to happen. It's not like an unfortunate circumstance. It's part of the design. Getting rid of debt is also not going to happen. Our entire system is fueled by created money. In fact, every time somebody gets a home loan, money is being created right there on the spot. Our money isn't really tied to anything. So we're kind of operating in this, dare I say, notional make-believe system. All right. Now, so why am I bringing all this up in the context of Black Americans? Well, Black Americans, we make a typical mistake of seeing, now this is, I'm showing you an image of the distribution of incomes across white people and tan, and then Black people, the black line. Now, Black folks, we can make the easy mistake of seeing white equals prosperity. But that's because when we see prosperity, it has a high concentration of white people. So if you see on the far right, that bar that goes way up, that represents all of the rich white people or high income white people. So when we see large numbers of high income people, they are white. But if you look to the left, everything below about $75,000, these people are struggling. And you can see that's most of the people, just based on the volume under that curve. That's most of the people, most of the Black people, and most of the white people. Most of the people are struggling, whether they're Black or white. But as Black people, the white people on the far right are most visible to us. They're visible to us and they're living a life different than us. And so we may think to ourselves, this is a racist thing. Now, they also do own the majority of things, but my point is that capitalism is not possible without exploitation. Republicans hate hearing stuff like that, but it's just true. You cannot run a capitalist society without exploiting the people who you employ for labor. It's not possible. So that means when Black people prosper, we exploit. When white people prosper, they exploit. White people are exploiting white people. The only difference was Black people got exploited a little bit more. So, slavery was not built on hatred. It was an economic decision to exploit one group of people exclusively because they could identify those people and they could make sure those people stayed on the bottom. They couldn't run, and they didn't have to pay them anything more than what it took to keep a human body alive. That was the main reason slavery was employed. Now, the hatred and the racial superiority, that just kept it alive. They used that to maintain it. If they made the poorer white people believe that they were superior, then they would help keep Black people on the bottom, which would allow them to be exploited even more. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that ownership, for the most part, of any boat, and by boat I mean economic engine, any business, any position of economic prominence, any opportunity to become a millionaire or billionaire, in some way or another, results in exploitation. Now, there's a couple of exceptions, and I would say that's probably your highly talented, highly visible, highly compensated individuals who make intelligent investments. But a lot of anything built on the labor of others, any business which employs the labor of others to turn large amounts of profits is almost by definition exploiting those laborers. It's almost inevitable. So Black prosperity inside of this global economic system means playing the game the same way that European Americans play it. It means that you have to either directly or indirectly exploit those who have less than you. If we made the Black income distribution match that of the Asian income distribution or the white income distribution, guess what? Most Black people would still be unhappy because most white people actually aren't that happy with the way things are. They are simply happy that they're not Black. You see, they don't have a lot of money, but they get to be white, so they're okay with it. All right. There is no scenario in America where Black poverty will be eradicated. As I said, poverty is required for capitalism to survive. There's no situation where a large cash infusion will solve Black people's problems. So the idea that somehow reparations would fix anything is not actually economically sound. Not unless those reparations were meant strictly used to purchase land. That possibly could do. So if there was a large land transfer, that could possibly help with reparations. But anything short of that, any kind of cash transfer would not change African Americans' situation significantly. Now, the one goal I think we should have is that we need more Black boat makers. And we need more Black fishermen. If I were to say like where I think I am on this whole scale, I probably represent like a fisherman as a Black doctor, because I can accumulate something. I'm not going negative every year, but I'm also not the boat maker. I'm not making money just by sleeping. I'm not like, I don't have a ton of money, but I just don't have debt. And I'm able to accumulate money over time. So I would say I'm closest to the fisherman. But here's the interesting thing. The cook is also able to accumulate money, but not as much as the fisherman. But in North America today, or in the United States today, guess who has the highest percentage of millionaires? If you had to guess, what occupation? Maybe you heard this before, but it's not doctors. It's school teachers. So in this particular example, that would be the cooks. And it's probably because school teachers keep their expenses low and they work for a very long time. Doctors don't make much money until their 30s, and they have lifestyle creep, social pressure to sort of have a big house, go on trips, etc., etc. So right there, I guess what I'm saying is that the big picture that I'm painting is that Black prosperity is not necessarily going to be tied to making more boat makers. It's probably going to be tied to making more Black cooks who live frugally. That's where we're going to see the most prosperity. Getting people to a point where they can at least accumulate. They can become a homeowner, and they can accumulate reasonable wealth and spend very little money. Going for the kill shot, where we try to make Black ownership of enormous institutions, we try to get that done. That is a Herculean effort. And even when we build Black businesses, I'm actually building 2 right now with fellow West Point graduates, and I keep them obscured. One, I stay in the dark. I don't tell people where they are, what the name is, anything. Just do it. I do it quietly. But even with that said, Black business will benefit the business owner, his partners, their families, and possibly a couple of their employees. But at the end of the day, the way capitalism works is it's still going to exploit someone somewhere. That's how capitalism works. Even if you look at the Jim Crow era, where Black business was very normal, those Black business owners, bankers, insurance people, grocers, they exploited the labor of their Black employees to turn a profit. They paid them less than the value that their labor created, which is kind of a loose definition of exploitation. But that's how it works. So I guess what I'm saying is, building our own is great. But when we build our own, it won't be ours. It'll be that person's. Because that's what happens with white people. White people have built their own. But don't be mistaken. That's those white people. And I'm pointing to the white people on the far right, while the people on the far left got to fend for themselves. That's how the game works. And although I would like to believe that all of us conscious Black brothers and sisters who've been through, lower middle class life and have risen to become physicians and then business owners, that we would gladly share our wealth with the community. I think we could be responsible and good business people, but ultimately, that prosperity is only going to go so far based on what is required to succeed in this capitalistic, debt-based society. So if we define capitalism as a market-driven system with private ownership, global trade, industrial production, and financialized economies, meaning all these weird financial products, then you must understand capitalism has been the dominant system of the Western world for 250 years. I'm not going to change that. You're not going to change that. It's here for a while. And considering all this information, going back to the question of Black hospitals and institutions, you got to ask yourself a couple of things. Who's going to provide the money to pay for a Black hospital or teaching institution? In today's world, how will you justify directing funds towards a hospital for Black patients run by Black doctors? See, the way America works is people will discriminate quietly, and then when you try to correct the problem out loud, they'll say, well, everything's fair. Why are you doing that? They'll cry reverse racism. Perfect example is a group of white doctors. They recently sued group of Black doctors in Philadelphia who had a Black doctor directory, which was meant to help Black patients find Black doctors. Yeah, can you believe that? Not only did they sue them, but they won. They said, we should be able to put our names in your directory as well. Of course, if they just put pictures in the directory, I guess those white docs might not get the result they're looking for, but yeah, so imagine if they do that with just a directory of our names and phone numbers. How in the world do you think we're going to build a whole Black hospital with a Black staff meant only for Black patients? How are you going to enforce that? How are you going to enforce that? No, sorry, this hospital is just for Black people. Well, then there's going to be a ton of hospitals saying, well, this hospital is just for white people. And then we got the same problems all over again. So what I'm saying is in the 21st century, where a good deal of America wants to pretend things are fair, you can't actually build anything that's only for Black people. You just can't do it. So yeah, going on to that idea, there are Native American hospitals. They're on the Indian reservation. It's called the Indian Health Service, and they are not good at all. Now, of course, this isn't a race-based, it's more of a geographic-based. They put the Indian reservations in some terrible places, difficult to access places a lot of people don't want to live. So obviously these people need health care, so they put hospitals run by a federal agency, the Indian Health Service. So in a way, you could say it's a race-based health system, but it's not exactly run by Native Americans, but it's for Native Americans, and it just isn't well implemented. So, could I see something like that happening for Black people? Probably. So, all that to say that economics has revealed to me that many of the problems plaguing America they go beyond race. Race gave us our start in this country and started us at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. And with the idea of meritocracy, Black folks were sort of cut off at the knees and very much limited in their ability to use meritocracy to escape their circumstances. Even if I think about my own family circumstances, it turned out differently for me because my grandfather made a couple of decisions way back in the 40s that directly impact me and my children today. He didn't flee to the north. He did not enter into He didn't seek manufacturing jobs in the North, which then didn't get him put into areas of high concentration and urban sort of congestion, which then didn't get him put in a pipeline to live in some unfavorable areas. Instead, he just stayed in the South, worked in the military, and eventually did very well, which then set my father up, which then set me up. And then, so, what's the overall message is that it's extremely complex, but the biggest problem is essentially capitalism. Capitalism means that most people will struggle most of the time. If you look at the chart over here, all this area, basically 75,000 and below, that's struggle. Okay? That's pretty much struggle. Even in 2016, $75,000, I believe, is kind of a struggle. All right? So capitalism means most of the people will struggle most of the time. And very least, if you look at my model, 50% of the people will never accumulate anything other than debt. Best case scenario. So no matter who's owning what, whether black people are owning it or white people are owning it, it's going to serve the owners. It's not going to serve most people. So if we're looking for black prosperity, it's like each individual has to fight their own battle. Your goal is to not be in the bottom 50%, as awful as that sounds. I don't think there's really any other way around it. We can't change this system. The system is old, and the system is huge. The best you can do is guide your family inside the system and help them understand that if you end up in that bottom 50%, you may never make it out. And if you make it into that top 50%, you have to be extremely frugal to accumulate much of anything, but it can be done. And if you can make it into that ownership class, if you can be the boat maker, then by all means, join your fellow black professionals, build, but understand that yes, you're you're not going to change the destiny of all black people by building some black businesses. You're going to make life better for you, your family, and maybe people just 1 or 2 degrees to your left or right. But black poverty is here to stay. That's not going to change. White poverty is here to stay. That's not going to change. This has been a pep talk. So I like to end with happy messages, but so black poverty is here to stay. White poverty is here to stay. There is no black business owner who can save everyone. There is no black business. And I know this because there's no white business owner that can save or will save all the white people. So it's up to each one of us. Save your family. That's the best you can do. All right. Hope you're all motivated now. That's all for me.